Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 29, Special Israel Middle East edition. Firstly, I bring you all warm regards from Eretz Yisrael, where I just spent close to 2 weeks being on the ground and sensing what our brothers and sisters are experiencing in these trying and challenging times. And there's a dual type of feeling. Number one is there's a certain natural calm, actually. No one's panicking, people are going on with their lives, but there's a heightened sensitivity and a sense of unity when you're under attack. And it was actually very gratifying and extremely empowering to be there. I felt very honored to be there. I visited some soldiers, went to Menachem Ovel. Tragically, some of the families that lost soldiers, children who are defending with their own lives Jews simply because they're Jewish. So I'll talk about that some more as we go along here, but there have been a lot of questions. But I want to begin with an introduction. Why am I discussing this in the context of Chassidus Applied? Well, the Rebbe of our generation, the seventh generation, felt it important to spend hundreds and hundreds of hours to talk about Eretz Yisrael. It's true that in 78, 79, Tavshel Lamed Ches, Lamed Tes, the Rebbe actually gave a Heirah to Nochsat Mimim, where I was working then, preparing the Rebbe Sichos, that we should publish separately the talks about Eretz Yisrael. But it was still part of the Farbrengens, and was most passionate talks about the situation then and over the years. So clearly it's part of Torah, part of Chassidus, of understanding what is Yisrael in our lives, understanding how we're supposed to look at it, how we're supposed to deal with the challenges, and having simply clarity. Besides what action to do, also clarity of how we're supposed to look at this. What are we supposed to communicate to others? And there are many issues today that are just really coming up. Frankly, most of them have already been addressed and have already been almost a replay. But still, every time it happens again, and there are more lives lost tragically, and there's more sakana and danger, obviously it's on the top of our minds, and everybody's eyes are glued to what's going on in Israel. So I'm going to address it in that context, the Rebbe's words, many sichos, letters, and a general approach of Eretz Yisrael, both begashmis, beruchnis, and so on, its role in our lives. And sometimes things that may seem obvious need to be spelled out, simply with the right words and the right aces, the right expressions, in order to understand it for ourselves, our families, and others as well. So let me begin with the most basic question. Should I cancel my trip to Israel? Someone writes. Rabbi Jacobson, me and all of my extended family are supposed to visit Israel this month for pleasure. We've been planning the trip for months. I know on one hand that we should go, support the economy, and have faith, especially since in the past the Rebbe insisted that in these times Israel was actually the safest place to be. But on the other hand, I am worried for my family. Is this safe? Should we reschedule for when everything quiets down? What would you advise? Okay. Well, when I was in Israel, one of the saddest things was that the streets were relatively empty, especially in the summer, the high season. Hotels, I was told, 15% capacity. The Koisel was sparse relatively on Shabbos and on Tisha B'Av. And that day, you all know, but the day before Tisha B'Av with the 2 attacks in Yerushalayim, so literally sparse is not the word. A few hundred people were there. You could literally walk to the wall. And they were knowing Tisha B'Av by the Koisel. So obviously, many people canceled their trips. Tourists, even in local Israelis, I guess didn't come out because of the fears or whatever it was. But it was sad to see the Eicha Yoshva Bada, the loneliness of Yerushalayim, of the Koisel, was even lonelier this year than usual. So the answer is an unequivocal no. Absolutely not cancel anything. I speak now using only the Asius and the words and authority of the Rebbe. The Rebbe's words, the safest place on earth, was a milsa b'taima. He didn't just say it for one time. He said it in the 6-Day War, he said it by the Yom Kippur War, he said it during the later intifadas and so on and so forth, many times. And quoting the Pasuk, Eretz Ashereni Hashem Elokecha Ba Mereishis Hashana Ad Achris Shana. This is the land that God supervises himself with his eyes are on the land. Even though Hashgacha Pratis, we know divine providence is all on every part of existence, but the Pasuk emphasizes particularly in Eretz Yisrael. So God is always watching this land. And there's no question that not only not to cancel, I would go even further. And one of the places I went to sit to be Menachem Oval, there was a soldier there, a friend of one of the boys that tragically was killed. And he said to me, he speaks in Hebrew we were speaking, he said to me, where are our brethren? What are the American Jews doing? So I said, I'm sure they're praying, they're thinking about you. He says, how come nobody feels the need to come? Not to go to war, just to come and show support, come be Menachem Oval. It broke my heart to hear these words. I had no answer. Frankly, my coming to Eretz Yisrael was not because of this. It was already pre-planned. But as I said, I was very glad to be there. And there's no question. We read a few weeks ago in the Pasuk, in the Parsha Mates, we read that when Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven asked Moshe Rabbeinu, Mikne Rav, we have a lot of cattle, we want to settle, not in the land of Israel, but on the east bank of the River Jordan. So Moshe said the memorable words. Moshe said to them, your brothers are going to war and you're sitting here. And he rebuked them for even the consideration. Until later, the Torah tells us, a few psukim later, what did Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven say? They said the following. Anachnu necholitz chushim lifnei Bnei Yisrael ad asher im meviyosem el mekemam. Leinoshuv el batenu ad hisnachel Bnei Yisrael ish nachlose. They said, we will go ahead of everyone else in war. And we will not return home until we are victorious. So using this quote, in my opinion, my humble opinion, every American Jew, every Jew anywhere in the world should be visiting Eretz Yisrael, no question, especially now, if nothing else, simply nicham avelim, to console the people, to show unity, to show that we are one nation. Because at the end of the day, Eretz Yisrael is a land of all Jews. Even those that don't live there, it's still our land. The Jews being attacked there is because they're Jewish. So it's a historic moment. Now obviously not many may not be able to afford it, so make a phone call. Find a way to sit complacently and indifferently in wherever we may be, because we have our lives in a time of war, in a time when Jews are under attack, simply because they're Jewish, is not exactly appropriate. I remember the hours and hours of the Rebbe's talks while he was sitting here in New York. You could see his heart and soul, his eyes, his whole spirit was with Eretz Yisrael. We're not getting now technically why the Rebbe didn't go to Eretz Yisrael. There's different reasons given for it, and that's relevant to our discussion. When we daven and we face East Jerusalem, it's not just a technical thing. It's our hearts and souls are there. And especially in a time of danger. Many of the Rebbe's greatest campaigns all began around Eretz Yisrael. 6-Day War, Mivtza Tfilin. Ma'alot, the attack in northern Israel, was Mivtza Mezuzah. The other Mivtzoyim were around also that period in time. Yom Kippur War. So we as Jews, wherever we are, we have to be with Israel in spirit, and if possible also Begashmis. Go for a day, go for 2 days. Now, I'm only speaking, I'm not here to tell anybody what to do, but in my opinion, it's not just for the people there, it's for the world to see that we are one nation. Now, Rachmana litzlan, I don't want to compare it to 1940 and 1935, when there was silence and the Jews in America, we weren't going to get into all of that. But when a Jew anywhere in the world is hurt, we all have to feel we're being hurt. And if it's your own brother and sister physically, biologically, tell me what each of us would do. So not only not to cancel, I would say even if you haven't planned to go, you should go. And I'm not getting now into the tourism or the pleasure. It's not the issue here. The issue is simply to be with our brothers and sisters in a time like this. Eretz Yisrael, Baruch Hashem, is a strong country. The Jews are strong and united. It has its challenges. But this is a time where we don't just daven for them, but we also connected in that way. Which leads me to the next question. What is the responsibility of a Jew when Israel is in crisis? Rabbi Jacobson, in past episodes, you quoted a letter from the Rebbe advising that in these times we should be increasing in our learning Tefillah and Avos Yisrael. And Gemilas Chasodim, I should add. Tefillah, the Tehillim the Rebbe suggested, chapters 20, 22, 69, and the other things. But is there anything else we can be doing to support Israel? I feel guilty sitting here safely, comfortably in the U.S. Should I pick up and go to Israel to be with my people? As I just said, absolutely yes. If you could, even for a day, 2 days, 3 days, and do whatever possible to show that type of support. Begashmis and beruchnis. There's a story with a young bacher who was here in the United States to come in 770. He was living in Israel's Chassidic home, and he had 2 brothers, and he was the youngest of 3. He came here in 1947 to learn in 770. When the War of Independence in 1948 broke out, his father was a Chassidic, said to him, your blood is not more valuable, your brother's blood is not cheaper than yours. You should come back here and fight in this war like your brothers are. Of course, being a Chassid, he wrote to the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Frierdiker Rebbe's answer was, what is the definition of an arik, of a deserter? Someone who doesn't go to battle. It's not someone who doesn't go to fight, it's someone who doesn't fulfill his position. If someone, for example, is in communications, or someone's in surveillance, or someone's in intelligence, or someone's in a different part of the battle, that's his role. If he starts doing something that's not his position, then he's deserting. So the Rebbe said, the Frierdiker Rebbe said to him, your role in this war is to sit here and learn Torah. So if you leave that makes you a deserter. Which means the following, that the passion, the commitment we have to have is just like someone going on the front line. Which leads me to the next question, serving in the IDF. What is the Rebbe's Chabad stance on joining the army to protect the state of Israel? Should a person seek to avoid serving, or should our youth serve, especially given the special units created for Shem and Mitzvah's people? Well, if you're busy and doing nothing, obviously, absolutely. If you're committed to learning Torah and you wake up in the morning just with the same discipline and the same passion as if you're fighting on the front line, and you're not just doing it as an excuse or to avoid this situation, then you're part of the war. That's your position. But to just sit around and smile and waste time and say, I got out of this situation, absolutely not. For the Rebbe, anyone in the Tzahal, the IDF, protecting Jews, if you especially see the Sikha the Rebbe spoke in Tov Shel Lamed Zayin, in the summer, when he spoke the famous talk to the Mitziyonim Yisrael, the Rebbe suggested that they should be called the special Mitziyonim, the extraordinary soldiers, instead of Nachi Yisrael, the wounded or the handicapped or the anyway limited. That he spoke about the high level of someone who's Meser Nefesh, who gives his life to protect another Jew. So that's why Chabad, you have many people who've joined the armed forces, are part of the military, and so on. If someone is learning Torah like a soldier is supposed to learn Torah, and it's literally like just doing the second half of the battle, because we all know that the battle is both a Gashmizdik and a Ruchnisdik one, which we'll soon discuss, the role of Eretz Yisrael and its position and so on. So obviously it's the physical battle, because Ein Semcha Ones, we don't rely on miracles. You have to do whatever you can. God blesses us in the things we do, so we have to use every way and natural means to fight and defend ourselves and protect our people. But at the same time, there's also, we all know, it's not our own power, it's God's power that He gives us as we use the nature. So in the natural world, it's not that nature has power. God Himself said, that's how I want you to wage war. But the war behind it is, of course, the war Beruchnis, which is even more power. Moshe held up his hands. As long as their hands were facing heaven, he gave Kayach to the Eden to fight Amalek. And that has to be with the same passion. If you're sitting around complacently and saying, I'm learning Torah, I'm yeshiva, you're wasting your time, obviously then that's not a derech. So, an answer to these several questions I just mentioned, it's very clear, no question in my mind. We are all in it together, and we have to do whatever is possible to help protect Begashmis and Beruchnis. Everyone has to find their position. If you're not sure what your position is, talk to Mashpia, Tarov, and say, what is my role in this battle, in this war? But to feel like we're not there, our brothers are going to war, and you're at the Atam Teshuvah point, you're sitting here, wherever that here is definitely not acceptable. As a matter of fact, if in some way you're not there, you have to be the ones that actually lead the way in some way. Even more passion than the ones that are actually fighting, like the Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven taught us. That we have to lead the way and not to finish and not go back home until we finish the job and help finish the job. Now, we can move over to the bigger question here. which is how are you supposed to look at this whole thing? Everything I discussed is immediate, on the ground, right now, sakana. We have to be part of it, and we have to do whatever we can to participate. But Gashmis, as I said, physically, spiritually, Teira, Vedimus, Chasadim, and obviously in any physical way, financial way, whatever, showing moral support. And as I said, if you can't make it there, find a way, send emails, find phone numbers. We have to treat it like it's our own brothers and sisters. Every Yid that fell, 60, 70 soldiers that died in this battle, are our mamish, our brothers and sisters. The only reason that they defended the country is because it's under attack by anti-Semites, by people who were than anti-Semites, terrorists, etc., etc. But how are we supposed to look at now, stepping back a bit, even though in time of war you can't be busy philosophizing, but nevertheless, it's critical to have clarity on the topic. What is going on? Especially now, we see a rising trend of anti-Semitism, international anti-Semitism, not just in Israel, but in Europe, in the United States as well. And how are we supposed to look at this whole thing? So let me read a few questions on that topic. Isolated and condemned Israel. In times of crisis, it becomes very obvious that Israel stands alone. How come among the nations we are singled out, isolated and condemned for merely defending ourselves and existing? How come we are losing the war on PR so badly? One question. Another questioner asks, it is getting harder and harder to have a rational conversation with people about Israel. A lot of people I know feed into the propaganda that Israel is an apartheid state and are committing genocide in Gaza. Even more horrifying is that I can't count how many times Israel was compared to Nazi Germany in recent weeks. Among, of course, was the president of Turkey himself, who was just re-elected. I added that. Well, I was advised to stop fighting a pointless war with misinformed friends and acquaintances, that this is an irrational hatred for the Jews, a Molech manifest. I can't help it. I spend hours brooding over this. It just makes my blood boil so badly that I need to do something about it. What is the appropriate way to respond to my liberal anti-Israel friends who side with the Hamas terrorist organization over democratic Israel? And then a whole slew of questions came in about the rise of anti-Semitism. Let me just read that as well. Rabbi Jacobson, from what I understand, the Rebbe's approach was very positive and never to cause fear in people. Lately, with the rise in anti-Semitism worldwide, my father has been very concerned and encouraging us to make aliyah, in subtle and not so subtle ways. I understand that this comes from a combination of concern for us, but my father's nature is to be more cautious and worried in certain areas. He has compared the situation in the U.S. to Germany in 1948, I guess it meant 1945 or earlier, where people were comfortable and didn't think anything could ever happen there, except for a handful of people who foresaw the need to get out quick. I've really been out of the loop with things politically raising a family, Baruch Hashem. My thinking is that everyone running to Israel won't help anything. If there's anti-Semitism, it's a message from Hashem to wake up and strengthen our Yiddishkeit. Can be in Israel, and you can still be in Israel and still be asleep, so to speak. Also, in contrast to the Rebbe's super positive approach, I once read Hakriya V'Akdusha. Hakriya V'Akdusha is a journal that the Friedrich Rebbe gave out during World War II. The Rebbe was involved in. And it was really scary. It seemed, if I recall correctly, that the Friedrich Rebbe was comparing Hitler to Haman and Purim. And just like Hashem sent Haman to get the Yidden to do tshuva, Hashem is sending Hitler to get the Yidden to do tshuva. It was a Purim edition during the Holocaust. Would this kind of thinking be applicable nowadays with the rise in terrorism, anti-Semitism, etc.? Any clarity you could provide on this issue would be greatly appreciated. Another question. The impending Geula, Armageddon, or a beautiful transformation? What's going on now, in other words? Is it impending Geula or a beautiful transformation? The world seems to be at a boiling point with all that's going on globally, from all the Arab nations being embroiled in their civil unrest, ISIS, the war in Israel, and the U.S.'s unsure financial future. You could add the Ebola scare with the whole disease as well, if you like. Many people say to move to Israel because the U.S. is crumbling and that Israel is the only safe place for a Jew. Should every Jew have a ticket to Israel and a passport? How does this mesh with having bitachon? How does this ideology stand next to all the Rebbe said about transforming the Golos and not having to flee like when we left Egypt? And finally, how can it be that only 70 years since the Holocaust, after swearing never again, there's been such a sharp rise in anti-Semitism, especially in Europe? It is shocking, disgusting, but most importantly scary. What should we be doing? These questions reflect the sentiments of many, many people, one wording or another, and I think critical to address from a Torah point of view, from a Chassidic point of view, from the Rebbe's point of view. The Rebbe addressed it in many different ways. So I think to really put it in context, it's critical to understand, yes, that we can be very complacent and apathetic when things are so-called running smoothly. Even though, frankly, as long as Mashiach is not here, things are never smooth. Just because we're comfortable doesn't mean things are going smoothly. It just means we're not noticing all the tremors. The Rebbe, as a true visionary, did not wait for a crisis to wake people up, because preemptive measures and understanding that which is going on beneath the surface is critical to the whole picture. If you look at the talks of the Rebbe after the 6-Day War, particularly, Tavshin Chav Zayin, the summer of 67, and then the Tavshin Chav Ches, the end of 67, and then later Sichos during Camp David, this is 78, but especially 67, 68, you'll see the Rebbe preempting and offering us a vision. Just like we address other topics in MyLife, Chassidus Applied, whether it's about depression, whether it's about marriage, whether it's about our own personal challenges, whether it's about children and education. There's also this issue, bitachon, and Israel particularly. What role does it play in our lives, whether you live there or you live outside of Eretz Yisrael presently? So this is a critical component in understanding ourselves as Jews and as human beings in this time. However, when tremors do become apparent and the eruption takes place, then everybody is obviously receptive to hearing something. But in truth, if you read the Rebbe's talks, you don't have to wait for Hamas to be shooting rockets and building tunnels on the Eretz Yisrael to be asking these questions. But now that we are asking them, and now that it is on our minds, let's address them. So the real question really is, and I'll start from Aleph Beis, literally, what is Eretz Yisrael? What role does it have? Let's play there's no devil in Jewish thought, so the devil's advocate, let's play the skeptic for a moment, simply to get clarity. The Talmud Bavli approach. The question is, why are we in Eretz Yisrael in the first place? If someone with seichel would ask a question, a simple logical question, say, why are you living in a land surrounded by hundreds of millions of enemies? They don't want you there. Go find yourself, live in the French Riviera, go to Sydney, Australia, New York, London, wherever it may be. There's a lot of beautiful places on this earth. Why are Jews insisting to be in Eretz Yisrael? Now, obviously, this is a question that would come from someone who has no idea what Israel is and what role it plays in Jewish life. Someone who perhaps is secular or assimilated. But I think we have to ask ourselves the question, even if we don't have the question. Because what is our answer to that? To just dismiss and say you don't get it? What is our explanation? And how do we explain it to someone that may not have that affinity, emotional, spiritual affinity, at least consciously, to the Holy Land? To go put the question and phrase it in Torah language? What is this thing with the Promised Land that Hashem promised Avraham Avinu and Yitzchak and Yaakov? And the Jews, the whole Torah is about going to the Promised Land. I don't know if you ever noticed this, but 70% of the Torah is a 40-year journey to the Eretz Yisrael. The first Chumash Bereshis is basically, it covers around 2,000 years from Kriyas Ha'olam, creation, until the passing of Yaakov and the Shvatim. Second Chumash, Shmeis, goes from Shmeis Ve'era to the middle of Parsha Bo, 2.5 chapters, covers the 210 years of the bitter Golus, Mitzrayim. And then in the middle of Parsha Bo, Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh, after Achedesh Hazeh Lachem, begins the Exodus from Egypt, and that takes the rest of the entire Torah is those 40 years. The time when they leave Mitzrayim until Eila Masa B'nai Yisrael, as we read a few weeks ago. These are the journeys, the 42 journeys during these 40 years. And where does the Chumash end? It ends at the end of Parsha Bamidbar. Then Moshe repeats everything in the last 37 days of his life. Where does it end? That the Jews are resting in the end of their journey on the east bank of the River Jordan. They don't even go into Eretz Yisrael. So how much is that? That's you're talking about basically almost 4 chumashim, almost 4/5, a little less than 4/5 of the Torah is all about this journey to. What is this promised land? What does Eretz Yisrael represent? And as I said, it's important not to take these things for granted. And the answer is, it represents the tachlis hakavonah, the ultimate purpose of existence. The same question could be asked: what do the Jewish people represent? Remember, Eretz Yisrael, Am Yisrael, it's the same name. They represent transforming this world into Adira B'Tachtenim. And we need to do it Eilam Shana Nefesh. As the Sefer Yetzirah explains, everything is time, space, man. As the physicists put it. You can say time, space, soul. Eilam is space, Shana is time, and Nefesh is soul. So in Eretz Yisrael, in space, is what Am Yisrael is in soul. And what Yom Kippur and the holy day is in time, as the Rebbe would often say, on Yom Kippur, Erev Yom Kippur, that the holiest person on earth goes into the holiest time, in the holiest day of the year goes into the holiest space. It's about bringing sanctity, Eretz HaKodesh, the Holy Land, taking Eretz Canaan, which is from the Lashon Mischer, business of this material world, and transforming it into a holy, sacred world. And that's why when Mashiach comes, it says, Asid Eretz Yisrael shetispashet b'chol haaretz, Israel will spread all over. Why? It's not a matter of conquest, because the holiness of Israel will spread everywhere, and then Israel itself will be in a higher level, Yerushalayim will be even higher, etc. It's about sanctifying this world. So Israel is the central purpose of existence. And that's what Hashem told Avram Avinu. And that's why the first Rashi and Chumash, as the Rebbe would cite so often, Mamash prophetic, Rashi, bringing from Medrash, 1,000 years ago, listim atem, they'll say, you've stolen the land from us, the Goyim will say. And Hashem will say, I gave you the Torah. That's why Bereshis Bara Lakim, I gave the land to the Jewish people. As he brings, Rashi elaborates there. That's why the Torah begins, Bereshis Bara Lakim. It should have started with Achedesh Azalachem. Because that's the first mitzvah in the Torah. Because Eretz Yisrael is part of the plan, the central plan, of elevating the entire universe and fulfilling the purpose for which it was created. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu was so nishteki, was so yearning to enter Eretz Yisrael, like the Gemara says, not for just to have a nice, comfortable life, but for the shleimus ha-mitzvahs that you could only do in Israel. Shleimus ha-mitzvahs you could only do with the Beis HaMikdash. And that's why we daven toward Eretz Yisrael. And that's why we aspire to the day when all Jews will return kibbutz golius. You could say, 1 second, Mashiach can come, everyone can stay where they are. Because the completion is in time, space, the human being is Eretz Yisrael. So it's not just a nice land. It happens to be Eretz Chol V'Dvash, a beautiful land, that's flowing milk and honey, the Sheva Minim, the 7 different species, and all the other parts of the beautiful land. Eretz Harim U'B'Koyes, land, the mountains, valleys, as we all know, the beauty of the land. But above all, the beauty of Begashmi is because of the beauty of Beruchnis. Think about Eretz Yisrael L'mayla, Eretz Yisrael L'mata, Yerushalayim Sh'Mayla, Yerushalayim Sh'Lamata, Beis HaMikdash L'mayla, Beis HaMikdash L'mata. Now, understanding that requires learning Chassidus, learning Torah, explaining what is the so-called, what does Kedusha mean? And how Eretz Yisrael captures that. And Eretz Yisrael itself, the 10 levels of holiness, with the holiest being the Holy of Holies on the Temple Mount. So it captures and reflects, and that's why in the Rebbe's words he would always speak Shleimus Haaretz, Shleimus HaTorah, Shleimus HaAm. The triangle of space, time, and the human being. So Shleimus, well in this case it wasn't time, Shleimus HaTorah, the whole Torah, the Shleimus HaAm, the entire nation, and Shleimus HaAretz, the entire land, which will be complete when Mashiach will come, and we will Yarchiv Hashem as Gvulcha, Hashem Elokecha as Gvulcha, and we'll have the entire land in a peaceful way, and so on. Understanding this lies at the heart of why Jews are in Eretz Yisrael. So it's true, there are many reasons people understand it from a secular Zionistic point of view. You can explain it, homeland. That may all be the external reasons that some people have, a homeland that brought so many people together. But what's the reason, the Pnimiyzdika reason? Why is that the homeland? Because this is the place for a Jew. And this is the center just like what a Jew is to the world, Eretz Yisrael is to the land of the earth. So we really have to understand what is a Jew. And when you understand this, you'll also understand the whole issue of anti-Semitism as well. There's a very powerful sikha from the Rebbe, Purim Tavshin Chav Hei. There's a Purim sikha, and he talks about anti-Semitism. He talks about the role of the Jew. I'll just review it briefly, because I think it's a tremendous insight, also to events taking place today. And then I'll go back to answering the exact questions that were asked here. The point that Rebbe brings there is a Gemara in Megillah Daf Yudaled, where it talks about page 14, Daf 14a, b, where he discusses a mashal on Haman and Achashverosh. Both of them were anti-Semites. They hated Jews. But it gives a mashal of a bala tal and bala chritz. Two people who owned a piece of land. One owned the land, and he had a mound, which disturbed him. Wanted to get rid of the mound. He wanted to have flat land. There's a certain advantage to that. The other one had a piece of land that had a pit in it, a hole in it, and he wanted to fill the hole. So they meet up one day, and the Gemara says, and they meet up, and he says, the Bal Hachriz, the one who has the land with the pit, says to the one that has the land with the mound, he says, I'll pay you for your mound, so I'll fill up my pit with your mound. So the man with the mound, the Bal HaTel, the Bal HaTel, the one who owned the land with the mound, says to the other one, he says, you don't have to pay me. I want to get rid of it, so you can take it for free. And says, this is Haman Achashverosh. Achashverosh was Bal HaTel, was the one who owned the land with the mound. Haman was the one that owned the land with the pit. And they joined together, La'abed HaYehudim, to destroy, God forbid, to annihilate the Jews. So the Rebbe asked the question, what exactly is this analogy, and what does it come teach us? All the details of it. Additionally, what's the whole thing? What do you need B'chlal an analogy for? Everyone knows, we've seen generation after generation what anti-Semites are. You need to explain it. And the Rebbe, in an elaborate discussion, talks about many fundamental points in this Purim Verbringen. And I want to just review a few key ones. First of all, the Rebbe begins a whole discussion of our relationship with the non-Jewish world. Makes it very clear that the way God created the world is that there's natural anti-Semitism. We'll soon get into the two types, which is Haman and Achashverosh, but there's natural anti-Semitism. And there's nothing a Jew can do that's going to change that. You can assimilate, Rebbe even brings there, you can stop putting on tefillin, have your Shabbos, open your store on Shabbos. I'm using examples that Rebbe gives. Make believe that you're not Jewish, it's not going to make a difference. You cannot change this fact. On the other hand, we find that we have a relationship with the non-Jewish world. We have an obligation to inspire them, to teach, to spread chesed. There are certain prohibitions we're not supposed to do. You're not supposed to steal from a non-Jew. So on one hand, we know they're hostile to us. We're talking now historically. We'll soon get into more specifics today. On the other hand, you're supposed to not just not do negative things to them. There's also a whole positive hashpah, like the Rambam Paskins in Sof Perek Ches, end of chapter 8 in Hilchos Malachim. Shavim mitzvah zeineyach. And not just because it's logical, but because Hashem gave it in His Torah. Which means, as the Rebbe says, that they have a connection to Atzmus Ein Sof. So how do you reconcile these two things? The Rebbe's answer is, you reconcile it very simply. And the Rebbe goes further, and we see efforts done to pay taxes to Nebuchadnezzar, and even in situations where we're dealing with enemies, to try to pray for the peace, to try to be reconciled with them, to try to pray for the peace of the Shleim Shalayir, the peace of the nation, the peace of the host that you live, the host nation in which you live, and on and on. So how do you reconcile these two? The Rebbe explains, and I'm elaborating a bit on the explanation, that both are true. Chesed l'umim chatos. If you think that you're going to be neisachein, that you're going to find a way, through your ingenious ways, to have them love you, and rely on them for that, that's incorrect. On the other hand, the Eibishter did put us in this world, and wants you to do everything, but derech hateva, to have a good relationship, and to bring godliness to this world. Let me translate it into simple English. This is not about just Goyim and Eden. Let's talk about Goyishkeit and Yiddishkeit. The purpose of the Jewish nation, beginning from Avram Avinu, was to come into a Goyish world. What does a Goyish world mean? A world that lives a secular world, a mundane world, that's involved in its Gashmizdika survival, and to elevate it, to understand that there's something greater than us, that there's a God, there's a purpose, that you shouldn't just be self-absorbed and driven by self-interest, but you should be, instead of being egocentric, to be God-centric. Instead of focusing on you and your needs, to focus on serving something greater than yourself. That's what Avram Avinu came to contribute, in simple English, which means not to live a life just greedy, selfish, but chesed, lasses, mishpat, a just life, a virtuous life, a giving life. He taught this to his family, and then continued generation after generation, and finally, a few generations later, 7 generations later, his children merited to stand at Mount Sinai, where God gave them his mandate. Why didn't he give them the mandate at the beginning of creation? Because you have to earn your way. Like an education process. The bar mitzvah, the bas mitzvah is by Mahar Sinai. So the point is, the whole Torah is to elevate the world. So it's to elevate a Goyish world. Ultimately the goal is, Oz epech kol amim, elamim, sofa bruda, to transform everyone in this earth. The Rambam Paschal is the end of Hilchos Malachim, that Mashiach will be Mola Oretz Deis Hashem Kamayim Liyam Achasim, a world that's completely consumed with knowing God. Lo yi'esik elam ela l'dasas Hashem b'lvad. So it's all about knowing God, all people. And the Jews were charged with this mission, people of the book, leaders, teachers, to teach the world. And that's exactly what they did, and it has ultimately affected the world. Millions and millions, billions, over 4 billion people today attribute, if you add Christians and Muslims, all attribute to the Torah being the original book, without getting into the distortions. That's the purpose. But built into that, the Eibishter made that there's a snagdus, the tzimtzum arishin. When God concealed his presence, he made it not easy. Like he speaks in Tanya, there's a milchama between the nefesh alakis and nefesh abamis. On a microcosm level, there's a milchama between the goy asher bekir b'cha, the so-called Gentile, the nation within you, and the soul within you, the divine soul. In the broader sense, on a macrocosmic level, the goyische Welt, Maisa Knani, as he speaks in the Torah, the behavior of the pagan world fundamentally opposes Esav Seineli Yaakov. It's a natural thing that the material world is going to oppose spiritual transformation and is going to create a battle. That's how God made it. It gets tragic when it turns into a Holocaust and to blatant anti-Semitism, which we'll address in a few minutes. But the fundamental hisnagdus, the fundamental hostility of matter to spirit is the way God created it. There's nothing spirit can do that's going to cause matter to suddenly not start liking the spirit. If spirituality tries to camouflage itself, tries to hide and say, you know what, I'm like you. The soul says to the body, I'm just like you. That's not going to make the body suddenly like the soul. As a matter of fact, it probably will incite the body to even hate the soul even more because you're trying to fake it. Because remember, at the end of the day, like he says in Tanya from Zayed, he says, Pnina v'soten l'shem shamayim niskavna. The body's resistance, Elam Haz's resistance to Elam Haba, to Ruchnius, to spirituality, is also part of God's plan. And as a matter of fact, it pains the Soten to challenge. So there's nothing we can do to get rid of this natural hostility and tension between matter and spirit. So what is a Jew's role? And I speak here Jew in the archetype concept, is to embrace his or her role, which includes Eretz Yisrael, the land, the centrality of Israel as part of this, and teach the body. Fight the battle and ultimately harness the material world and teach it that you too are part of this purpose as well. And that's the role of the Jew in this world. So there's going to be the natural hostility. And there's nothing that can change that. Now I should just add as a footnote, it's more than a footnote. Over the years we've actually seen, as the Rebbe speaks about America, Malchus Shel Chesed, that it's ultimately permeated. Nations of the world still have developed a refinement where there is appreciation and has become a haven for the Jewish people. But don't ever think it's because you figured out to win Nobel Prizes or because you've learned to ingratiate yourself or in some way appease the nations, that's why they suddenly like you. They ultimately like because that's what God wants. And when a Jew behaves in that way, ultimately it permeates and will affect the nations of the world until Mashiach comes. So that's why it's not a contradiction. Our role is to transform the world. But don't convince yourself that the world is teifas malkum, that you suddenly have to worship it. Or you have to rely on its favors. It's God's blessing that protects the home. But then afterwards you have to do everything possible because that's how God wants it, to make sure that you do it in a natural way. Have good relations, have representatives that represent you for the government, pray for their peace and their welfare, find ways to support them, etc., etc. But not because you are now stooped to that level. This was the introduction to the whole topic. Then the Rebbe went into discussion and said, well, I should add before we get into that. And the Rebbe gave many rayas to this. When the Jews left Mitzrayim, they left with 600,000 strong-abled soldiers. They had 15 different types of weapons, the Yerushalmi says. They had Moshe Rabbeinu at their head. So they could say to themselves, you know what, God, you don't have to get involved. They started wondering, is God in our midst or not? You suddenly think it's your own power. Now, you're not saying you don't want God. You're saying you don't need God right now. So suddenly one little nation, Amalek, the Rebbe said, Ein Felkel, one small nation, was able to attack them because they lost touch with the source of their strength. The source of the strength is God. The fact that it manifests b'derech hatev, that you have a strong army, that's because the root of it is a divine root. But don't ever think that it's your power. You're starting to think it's your power, then you become vulnerable. And Amalek can attack you. And it's fascinating what the Rebbe says there. I want to just add this point. The Rebbe says that when you go to a war with Alpi Seichel, with Seichel, so then whoever's stronger is going to win. But if you go to a war with passion, and you feel it's your whole life is dependent on it, then even a small little group can vanquish a much larger country, a much larger army. So a little Amalek can vanquish them once you're going with your seichel, with your logic, you're forgetting that it's rooted in God's power. And you could also say the other way around. Chaneke, ma'atim, rabim biyad ma'atim, chazokim biyad chaloshim. The weak vanquished the strong because they went with God's power. But it's interesting because it reminded me of what's going on right now in Iraq, which I was going to address soon, but I'll just say it right now. A small little band, I says, but they go with passion. It could be completely obscene, beheading children in the most, like back to the Middle Ages, but the passion is there. And someone that fights with passion, even if it's completely misguided, will usually vanquish someone that is very guided and very moral and ethical, but is complacent. So every war has to be fought with that passion that it's God that gives you the power. I'll get back to this shortly. Let me go back to the Sikh of Purim Tavshin Chayah. Then the Rebbe continues and says, now what is the root? What is the cause for this hostility? He says there could be two things. Balatel and Balacharitz. The mound and the pit. What is the difference between the two? One sees the Jewish people as, listen, this world belongs to the secular world. It's a mundane world. What are you coming here for? You're an extra accessory. You're a mound. And the Rebbe points out there, it doesn't matter what that mound is, whether it's made out of gold, silver, or plain dirt. Why are you disturbing the plateau, the flat land that I have? You're standing out. You're jumping out. I want to get rid of you. That's coming from a certain type of, I own this land, I own this earth, as Esav said to Yaakov. You belong in Elam Haba. What are you coming into this world? What are you coming to this material world and disturbing it? That's one way. That's one root of anti-Semitism. That's Achashverosh. The Haman was a Balacharitz. It was even a way more profound. What's the vacuum? What does Charitz mean? That there's an emptiness. There's a hole. There's a hole in my heart. Why? Because he senses that the Jews are the conscience of the world. He senses that the Jews are coming to teach a higher standard. And that makes me feel inferior to you. So that brings out a terrible hatred. That the material world, the goyishkeit of the world says, why are you coming and trying to bring higher standards? So instead of lifting yourself up to a higher standard, Haman, and accepting the Torah as God offered Bnei Yishmael and Bnei Esav by Matan Torah, instead of lifting yourself up so you won't have this inferiority side, this hole, this pit, you say, no, let me get rid of that conscience. It's interesting, though the Rebbe doesn't bring it, that's exactly one of the things that Hitler, Yimach Shemai, wrote. That the Jews, there are two things we're going to get rid of the Jews. One thing is the circumcision they brought, and the second thing, the conscience. He actually wrote that. So that's the two different Baal, the one who owns the land with the mound, and one who owns the land with the pit. How is that relevant to our discussion? It's extremely relevant. So first of all, know that, let's not be suddenly shaken up that there's hostility in the world. And I speak, first of all, from the root. As soon as there's a tzimtzum addition, there's hostility. Now, of course, that hostility has manifested in ways that were far worse than just a hypothetical concealment or a divine concealment that turned into a Holocaust. But what's the root of it? The root is because God allowed and wanted a world that will be hostile, a material world that will be hostile to a spiritual world. A goyish world hostile to a Yiddish spirit. So let's not be shaken up by that. That's a mitzvah. Thank God the world has gotten far more refined and we live in peace here in the United States and many places. But don't be shaken up that there are goyim like that still manifest that voice. What's our approach? To hide? Our approach is what? To assimilate. To say, you know what, I'm just like you. Why are you attacking me? I'm just like you, the goyish Welt. As I said, that will not make a difference because it's part of the natural reality. What's the way is to be even more Jewish, is to embrace and celebrate our spirituality, our role in this world, and the role of the centrality of Eretz Yisrael. If the Israeli leaders would get up and say, we are here to bring spirituality to this world, to teach what is ethical. Don't preach to us what God says. We can teach you what God says. Right now, we've given up that platform. We basically say, leave us alone. Don't attack us. Who's preaching God? Radicals. Fanatics. People are bringing back the world to the Middle Ages. Either convert, they tell the Christians in Iraq, ISIS, which stands for the Islamic State for Iraq and Syria. And now they say some call it ISIL, the Levant. They don't just want Syria and Iraq, they want the whole Middle East for the Caliphian dream. So we've basically surrendered. We've allowed them to take the charge. Now, obviously, everyone's repulsed by their approach to what God wants. But they're talking with that passion, as I said. And with passion, you get places. We can learn from the passion, but the passion should be directed by the children of Abraham that originally taught it, which is the Jewish people, and say, you want to know why Israel exists? Israel exists to protect you, to teach you what God wants of us all. So it's to embrace this. And in both ways, dealing with both sides. Achashverosh, his problem is, doesn't want, why are you coming into this world altogether? I don't need you here. You're extra. You're a mound that disturbs my reverie, my peace. Haman is arguing, why are you bringing a higher standard that makes us all feel inferior? And therefore both of them want to get rid of the Jewish people. Our response is, we embrace God who sent us to this earth, and just as we vanquish Haman and Achashverosh, the same is true in every generation. So we recognize that there's a world out there, and we pray for it. We pray for its peace, but we don't think that we rely our destiny and our legacy and our future is not dependent on the world, dependent on God. So it's a combination, an interesting combination. We have to do everything b'derech hateva. So this is a more theological way to look at the whole issue of Israel being condemned. It's a natural thing. Obviously, we'd love to have that people just see straight. And I think you don't have a more yizbararu v'yislabnu advarim as we have today. You literally see that whatever Israel does, they're still being attacked. I would say a miracle has happened. Literally, during the 9 days, Israel under attack. by rockets that are just randomly shot over thousands of them of the cities of innocent people in Israel. Those tunnels was al tiftach peh, what they wanted to do with that. And the world condemning Israel, or a lot of people condemning Israel, UN, United Nations, noch. The Rebbe called the House of Lies, as he told Netanyahu, that Israel is attacking civilians. As many people have pointed out, in Pakistan, many more civilians are being killed as we speak. No one even knows about it. So it's clearly blatant anti-Semitism, masked as anti-Zionism, whatever you want to call it. So the Eibishter sends a miracle. What does he send? An ISIS in Iraq suddenly provoked the United States with their blatant genocide, as the president put it, of ready to kill and behead innocent men, women, and children in Iraq. People who have basically the same philosophies as Hamas, as Al-Qaeda, as Hezbollah, etc., all over the place. And America is bombing now Iraq, their things, and also offering them sending down humanitarian aid. What more do you have? Right in the middle of all of this, very clear that even this country is doing exactly what Israel is doing. No one's paying attention that this is mamish the same thing. So we could see God's hand in this whole picture, besides all the miracles of the rockets not having that much effect, even though every rocket and even every one casualty is already a major thing. But to appreciate how the global dynamic, which we'll talk about more in coming weeks, the global dynamic, how it's affecting that whole region. And it's clearly a wake-up call for us to understand that there's a picture unfolding here. And this brings me to the medrash that the Rebbe brought from Yalkut Shmeini and other medrashim. As I said here, we may not have all the time because I want to cover some few more questions, but I'll definitely continue this discussion. Now, all the medrashim still does not deal with this simple issue. We want to have peace, and we want to have no casualties, and we want to have shalom al Yisrael and shalom for the whole world. But understanding the dynamics behind it is a critical component in the whole picture. And you clearly see, we're now in the 13th year from September 11th. You clearly see that there's a unfolding picture here where you see literally Bovel, which is the area where Iraq is today. You know, one of the Shalosh says that of is Roshatevis Edom Bovel. Edom is the Western world, including the United States, the Christian world. Bovel is attacking Edom, and Edom is retaliating. And as they retaliate in their battle, as it's predicted in many Midrashim and the Zohar, Pasha Ve'era, and so on, talk about this, that it's all a prelude. And the Rebbe's Yalkut Shmeini, which he spoke about in the Persian Gulf War, that Al Tiru, that Jews should not be afraid. Why? Because all that I'm doing for you. Bonei al tisyaru. My children, don't be afraid when they'll see the attacks going on in that area. So though the Rebbe spoke about it down with Saddam Hussein, literally the same medrash applies right now. You literally see it happening in the same area, just different names. Bovel, destroying the pious edition, Nebuchadnezzar, and then Edom destroying the second base of Midas Rome, and Rome and Babylon are now in confrontation, all in a way protecting the Jews in Eretz Yisrael. So the hostile world, the material world, is turning on each other. I'm not sure if Rome and Bovel can be compared also to the Bal HaCharitz. Are these two different approaches, the first temple, the second temple? But maybe you can connect it as well. Nebuchadnezzar was definitely more like Achashverosh, who was basically his predecessor. Which is that the Jews are just a pain, basically an extra growth. We don't need them. And maybe Rome sees the Jews as being, you're preaching to us something. Your existence itself demonstrates a superior approach to life. God's vision. Atam Eda, you're witnesses to God. Let's get rid of the witness. That way we don't have to live up to that standard. That element of inferiority, the charitz, the pit. But regardless, when you start looking at the dynamic, you see here literally a choreography. And again, it should be one that has no casualties and just a lesson in our lives. But unfortunately, we do live in a world where there are reality checks. You could even say that maybe the Christian world, Edom, has already matured to some extent with a country like the United States and protecting Jews. And the Muslim world, the Bnei Yishmael, have yet to mature. They're still in the 16th, 17th century mode of a certain primitive element, and they too will have to mature. Because if you hear what the hate that they spew, is still plenty to grow in their attitude to what the Jews and Eretz Yisrael represent. But we have a role to play here. One of the things you see from the Rebbe was he did not focus on Arabs being our enemies, or on America or other countries being anti-Semitic. He focused, what are we as Jews going to do? And this is the Ge'en Yankiv, the pride, the clarity, the moral vision that we as Jews and Eretz Yisrael particularly has to represent. And not just to say, hey, you know what, we're more sensitive to civilians than anyone is. That's beautiful. And the question is whether it's even wise to announce it and it's even wise to use in the times of war. We're not getting into that right now. But it's much more than that. We, the Jewish nation, and Israel represents a higher standard. And that is ultimately going to be the key to all success. To teach the world what God really is like and what God really wants. Not like these radicals that are going extreme craziness, as the Christians once did, in basically the ultimatums, either my way, the highway, or literally the sword. That we will literally, with a sword, kill you unless you do it my way. Or the other extreme, which is ultra assimilation. Get God out of the picture altogether, which is another side of the world, but to find a balanced God. That God is ultimately the one that created the world. And he told us to use natural means, as I discussed earlier. So in answering the big question about in times of crisis and so on, yes, we have to have absolute clarity of our position. And we have to be able to articulate it. And no question a PR war needs to be fought. But let's not get disturbed by the fact that the world is simply doing what they did in 1935, 1940, in the 1800s and 1700s for 2,000 years. The root of it is the hostility of a material world, a goyish world, to God's purpose. But it's manifest, unfortunately, also in true hatred, in hatred that comes down to the worst level that we have to battle. But with the battle against the hatred is by battling it with the positive that we represent. And obviously using God, the blessings we have, thank God, an army, to protect. I'm not suggesting this is a purely theological or spiritual battle. We have to also use what we have to and use it without fighting a war with one hand tied behind our back. Yeah. Now, being that we have shortened time and I don't think I can address everything here, I still wanted to address the question negotiating with Hamas in the Arab world. And I want to address, let's see here, what else did I not address? And how should we look at the escalating battles in the Middle East? I gave a little taste of it. Briefly, let me just say one thing about negotiating. The Rebbe Simon Shin Chavtes reigns supreme, not just as halacha, but also as common sense. When they're in a state of peace, you give everyone the benefit of the doubt until proven otherwise. When you're in a state of war, nobody gets the benefit of the doubt. It's as simple as that. Hamas's charter just has to be read. Read the charter. It speaks for itself. It calls for the annihilation of Israel, of every Jew anywhere. Very similar to the ISIS and the others. And you see it playing itself out in Iraq. They're actually making these ultimatums. Either die or convert or leave. I don't even know if they're letting them leave. So we know very clear what the charter says. So to dismiss that and say, you know what, if you negotiate, they may agree to get rid of the charter, that's a non-starter, my friend. In halach, in the lashon of the halach of Simon Shin Chavtes, when you're surrounded by an enemy and they come to you al kashvet teven on Shabbos, they come to you, so let's just discuss business, we're not even going to war. Because they're a sworn enemy, you have to mobilize. Sofek pekuach nefesh. The quote from Shimon Chavtes, and it's not after Eretz Yisrael, as the Rebbe says, Naharda, places even anywhere in the world. As a matter of fact, the Rebbe brought the same halacha regarding the exodus from Crown Heights and other communities. It's not simple to just leave a community, a Jewish community, anywhere in the world. Because if you're dealing with people that are sakana, danger, what right do you have to suddenly leave and put people in more danger? So this is the bottom line. This is the foundation of all negotiation. You want to negotiate? The mere fact that you're sitting at a table with someone who calls for your annihilation is already a defeat. We're not in the same place. You've declared war. The fact Israel is fighting here defensively, waiting for rockets or tunnels. But you think, let's say there were no rockets and tunnels. Hamas charter still stands. It's still your enemy. The question is whether it's wise to go on offensive war and get rid of them altogether. You could argue that as well. But definitely, just because they're shooting rockets, suddenly what? We suddenly acquiesce and say they're a sworn enemy. You want to not be an enemy? There's ways to demonstrate that. To give land for peace is ludicrous for the same reason. I'm just giving you briefly the picture due to limited time. And I'll address this more. So the answer is in how to negotiate. Negotiate out of strength. Besides the fact, psychologically speaking, you never negotiate out of weakness. Why did the Allies demand unconditional surrender of Germany and Japan after World War II? You already bombed their cities. They already lost. Let them save face. Don't be unconditional. Make it conditional surrender. Because in war, my friends, when millions of people have been killed, you can't go back. It's not about saving face. You have to know there's a clear winner and a clear loser, and the winner dictates the terms. In 1967, sadly, with a miraculous victory that God gave the Jewish people, the Eretz Yisrael, unfortunately, it is Israel that allowed the loser to think like they're a winner. And that's the root of many of our issues. We'll address more of this, especially based on the talks of the Rebbe then. I also want to emphasize, now is not a time to go and second guess. We stand united, obviously, with every one of the soldiers. We're not here to create a civil war among ourselves, but we need to have clarity, moral clarity, and understand what our role is, and understand what Eretz Yisrael is, and not be apologetic or defensive in any possible way. Now, when a winner allows a loser to feel like a winner, you have a lot of problems. And there's a lot of sadness involved in that, and many of our problems today are just an outgrowth of that. And we will address this, please God, in the coming episode. So, let me conclude on a note with a blessing. Coming from Eretz Yisrael, Einei Hashem Elokecha bo, Eretz Asher Einei Hashem Elokecha bo, a land whose God's eyes, Hashgacha, is there all the time. You could see it literally with events lately going on. You see it with the clarity of suddenly the war being moved to Iraq. Literally the same type of war. The president could announce the bombing of Hamas military, just like he's announcing it in Iraq. He could do it also in the Gaza Strip. So we see mamish those miracles. We have to appreciate them and remember, we live in a world, and therefore we have to go with the levushei hateva, and we have to recognize and do everything we can in natural ways. Use our tools, use our wisdom, use our weapons, use our armies. But at the same time, we have to remember the root of the strength and power is not in Gashmis. It's not the approval of the UN. It's not the approval of the nations of the world. It's God's already made the choice. Losus lahem nachlos goyim. As Rashi brings. He gave us Eretz Yisrael. He gave us the purpose of existence. It's not about he gave us to own it. He gave it to help the Jewish people, to give them the power to spiritualize the world. The Medrash says, had the nations of the world known how much the Beis HaMikdash protects them, they would have surrounded it with legions and make sure nothing ever happens to it. That's the story, my friends. Eretz Yisrael is the center of everyone's attention. Even though we'll say it's disproportionate, the disproportionate is not the reaction of Israel. Disproportionate attention to what's going on in Israel. The flip side is, why is the people's attention? Because this is the Holy Land. Because subconsciously, unconsciously, everyone on this earth knows this is where the center of existence is. This is the purpose of existence. So they focus on what Israel is doing wrong. But the truth is that's what everyone's drawn to. And they're not drawn to what's happening in Pakistan and other places. I'm not trying to be Malamed Schus why there's disproportionate attention and complete double standard. But everything has a root of something positive. So our role is to do our job. Every one of us are soldiers in this army. Some have a position to be a good mother in your home and family and teach your children what it means to be Jewish, what it means to fight the war on that level. Some of us have to do it as yeshiva bachrim. Others do it by going actually to be on the front lines, physically doing what they have to do. We all have to mobilize ourselves in a time like this. This is what the Rebbe taught us. The war is for all of us. We mobilize. The Rebbe's, all his mitzvahs, as I mentioned earlier, were launched in connection to something in Israel. So they all came from a negative. There was a war in Israel. The war is tefillin. Complementing the physical, the spiritual. Mezuzah, bayis mol esforim, mivtzah teirah, mivtzah tzedakah, and then the others that developed over the years after that. So we're at war, and we have to recognize that, and the war is with a hostile material world. Our job is to not nispol them, not to be affected, but to hold strong and know this is exactly the purpose of existence. Hopefully we should not need any reminders that there is still hostility, and the world should finally recognize, and will definitely recognize, if we behave the way we're supposed to behave, the world will finally be aligned. A world that we're on the threshold of having, Mol Oretz Deis Hashem Kamayim Liyam Chasim, where all the nations of the world will put down their swords, swords will be turned into plowshares, and all the other nevuahs and prophecies, especially coming from Tisha B'Av. We have Edom and Bavel, of both attacking Yerushalayim, and now they're at war with each other. And ultimately, as the Zohar says in Sof Pasha Ve'era, will be Yisrael Esa Chayil. It's all meant that Israel will rise, and we'll have peace in Eretz Yisrael, we'll have Shalom, the entire world, and the Eibishter Sheben should be Menachem and console those that have had any losses. It should only be simchas from here on. We shouldn't have any losses. I also want to mention, obviously, the tragic murder of our colleague and friend, Yosef Raskson, which, whether a hate crime or not, we're not sure, but doesn't really matter. Whatever crime, whatever, it's a crime against a Jew. And any loss is a loss of all of us. The Eibishter should bless their family and should only have simchas, and we should have no more tzad in any possible way, and only good news. This has been My Life, Chassidus Applied, episode 29, dedicated a special edition to Israel and the Middle East. And please, if you have any comments, questions, sources, anything you'd like to contribute, please send us to MyLife, to meaningfullife.com/MyLife live. And if you want to write to me personally, it's Simon at meaningfullife.com. And until next week, 8 to 9 p.m., everyone should have a blessed week, and there should be shalom and only good news in Eretz Yisrael and everywhere in the world. Thank you very much.